This series of the 50 Faces podcast is proudly brought to you by B Finance, a trusted partner to the world's leading institutional investors. With a proven track record in strategy, implementation, and oversight, B Finance delivers bespoke investment consultancy that empowers asset owners to achieve their unique objectives. Whether it's refining portfolio strategy, selecting fund managers, monitoring performance, or getting better value for money, B Finance combines global expertise with tailored solutions to unlock value for their clients. To learn more about how they've supported over 500 clients in 45 countries, managing assets totaling over $9 trillion, visit bfinance.com. Our next guest has sustainability at the core of everything she does. Hear from her how her experience with the rough and tumble of water polo prepared her for a career in portfolio management, and what sustainability with purpose and with substance really means in this context. I'm Ethan Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, which showcases inspiring professionals in the world of investment and beyond by focusing on their people and their stories. I'm joined today by Stephanie Niven, who's a global sustainable equity portfolio manager at 91. She started her career as an equity analyst and subsequently held a series of portfolio management roles. She was previously an ambassador for the Diversity Project and sits on the advisory board of Girls Who Invest. Welcome, Stephanie. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Well, I'd love if you could talk us through your career journey and going right back to where you started at university and how you ended up in the world of investing.
Sure. So next year, 2025, is my 20th anniversary of doing this role, which I think is like quite a shock to suddenly be at 2 decades of thinking about global equities. But if we take it right back, so I started in this profession having done an internship. And I was super lucky to meet the right person during my university time to interview for the right role and effectively be pulled into this career. I didn't have the pure kind of maths and economics focus that many people in this industry do have. I did study double maths at A level, but what I really liked is the kind of iterative thinking approach of arts subjects. So I studied history at university, and I really liked the way that you can make a topic your own. You can have a different point of view, and it really contrasts with that kind of black and white nature of maths. So I really kind of looked for a career coming out of university that enabled me to kind of bring some of that technical side, but also that idea that we can have different perspectives, different views, and effectively new information can continue to come out and really change the way you approach an idea and change the way you think.
Really interesting. And would you say that that background gave you a leg up maybe in how to develop an idea of your own, say an investment thesis or a stock idea, because you had to almost kind of tell a story?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's that telling the story idea that's always appealed to me. So thinking back to a great event in history, but having your own perspective, your own point of view, and something that you think you can engage with others on and really debate and take forward an idea. And that's always been something that motivates me and really keeps me in this profession, because ultimately you can never have the final idea. You can never have that concrete yes, no answer in investments. I mean, the markets humble you every day and tell you something new. And it's that intellectual kind of journey, that intellectual kind of excitement that keeps me in investments, keeps me in the equity markets, and really keeps me focused whenever I come into the office and talk to my teammates.
Before we launch into a bit of a deep dive around sustainable equity investing, I want to circle back again to a bit of your history, because you have sport has played a large role in your life. And in many of our podcast guests, sport has played a large role, whether in developing them in terms of discipline or teamwork, or just in terms of goal setting and pursuit. What role has sport played for you, and how has that influenced you professionally?
Sure. And I think you're exactly right that there are a lot of sporty people in this industry as a whole. And certainly in 91, where I am at the moment, we really have a lot of people who've been at very high levels across a whole range of different sports. And what I think is interesting is the kind of discipline it brings to your life. So I grew up as a swimmer. I also did some hockey. I took up running at university. I entered the London Marathon back in the days when you had to enter 5 years consistently to get a place. And I did that. I started that process when I was at university thinking I would never get in, but I got in the first year. So I had to take up running to kind of complete that task. And I also did a lot of water polo at university. And so what that taught me is you meet people in different places, you meet them having come from different backgrounds, you mix with people you haven't encountered before, and you really compete with them on a different playing field. And I really liked the way, you can bring dedication to a sport and then you play games, and there's lots of things that go into the outcomes of, for example, a water polo match. There's the circumstances of the day, the mix of the teams, different tactics, different strategies. You can never predict the exact outcome. And I loved having different people come into that arena, bring different perspectives. And it's also bringing different backgrounds together and introducing new topics, introducing new ways of thinking. So I found that sport gave me that disciplined approach. It made me mix with different people, and it kind of opened doors that I would never have expected along the way.
And just a quick question about water polo, because you're the first guest that has an expertise in that. So as a sport, what would you say it needs to play at that level? Is it about stamina, skill, strategy? Just give us we've asked the same of ice skaters too. So just to see.
So I would say it's like rugby, but underwater where the referee can't see. So a lot of kind of things come out of that. So there's a lot of rough and tumble, can be quite violent, but ultimately there are different ways to win in water polo. So you could be a speedy swimmer, and effectively that's the kind of role that I used to often play. But you could also be a really dominant, we call them pit player, which would be kind of like the person who scores a lot of the goals. Or you could be a very central player where you feed the ball up the pitch, or you could even be the goalkeeper. So it's a game where there's lots of different talents, but ultimately you need someone bringing each of those skills together to make a successful team.
That certainly sounds intense. So maybe good practice for a triathlon, for the violence of the swimming section of a triathlon. Moving then to the sustainability aspect. So I take it you didn't start 20 years ago as a sustainability expert, but you have developed into one. How did that enter your story?
Sure. So I've always been a global equity investor. I've focused on a range of different sort of subsectors. I started looking, for example, at Brazilian pulp and paper companies back in 2005. I've looked at capital goods. I've looked at materials companies. I've even looked at the energy markets before kind of moving on to areas where I felt there was more predictability. There was more of a competitive moat in the sorts of businesses that I was looking at. So I really enjoyed looking at healthcare companies, looking at some of the higher spec kind of industrial companies. So I kind of moved my investment sort of focus away from areas of the market that I would say are more driven by commodities into areas where businesses can have competitive advantages, and you can think about how they might persist over time, how their competitive positioning might benefit them and enable them to make consistent value creation, particularly relative to competitors. And it's really in thinking about competitive advantages that I started to think more along sustainability lines. I started thinking about how corporate culture can underpin competitive advantages, how businesses can engage their employees, how they can motivate their employees, how they can encourage their employees to continue to innovate and lead to growth through their operations. And it's that kind of starting with competitive advantages, leaning into corporate culture that got me thinking more broadly about value creation, and particularly about durable value creation. And it's from corporate culture that I started thinking, well, actually, there's other dimensions we can think about here if we're going to think about stakeholders. And it led me to kind of lean more into, well, actually, where are these areas of growth, these areas of structural opportunity across the globe that companies with competitive advantages can start to lean into? And it's through that kind of process that I started to lean into the space. And it's a fantastic space. I mean, we'll probably come on to this. It's gone through quite a sentiment cycle. But I think if you kind of pull it back and you sort of say, well, how can you pull sustainability driven insights into your investment process? That is still intact. There is still an alpha opportunity in that approach. And it can be a very differentiated alpha opportunity. So if you have a perspective that corporate culture is going to lead to better innovation over time, you might say that that either leads to 1% more growth, perhaps, than the market's looking for, or better margin resilience, because effectively you have lower turnover and the people that you do have within your company are more engaged, more likely to be productive. So that's really how I came to sustainability, not in a straight line at all.
Really fascinating. So it was the alpha quest that drove the sustainability interest, I suppose, and culture at the core. Just digging in a bit into the culture part. So obviously not every corporate culture is unique, I suppose, as individual as people are and as companies are. What have you found to be some of the hallmarks of successful culture? Or do you think about successful? How do you define a culture that you want to invest in?
So, corporate culture can mean many different things to many different people. And the way we think about it here within the Sustainable Equity team at 91 is really through the lens of organizational workplace practices. And what that really means is how is a business set up to engage its employees to ensure that they have the best chance of success? And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for companies that have really took the step of thinking about people as their most important asset and then setting up their structures, setting up their benefits programs, setting up their decision-making processes such that people feel engaged, enfranchised, and motivated to do their best. And it's that sort of perspective that we're trying to talk to companies about to try and uncover ways in which perhaps that culture is a competitive advantage and really hasn't been fully understood by the market and not priced into the share price. So engaging on the lens of culture, talking about organizational workplace practices and really understanding how companies can best motivate, best engage their employees is something that's really important to the way that we invest.
Fantastic. And then you touched on it, I think, in terms of the evolution of sustainable investing. And we're going to go through some of the main discussion points, I think, around this area. But evolution, we've had a bit of pushback. We have ESG, the death of ESG being discussed. What would you say in terms of this becoming mainstream?
So I think where we are is we're going through a cycle, and you see many cycles all throughout investment avenues. And this isn't the first cycle we've seen in sustainable investment. We've seen, particularly in the kind of decarbonisation space, we've seen previous extreme negatives in '09, in 2013, in 2014. And effectively, what we're really talking about there, though, is the rating of companies, the sentiment of the market towards companies. Because if you really look under the cover, these sustainable drivers are still in place. You know, decarbonisation is still happening. Healthcare impact is still flourishing. Financial inclusion is still leading to a lot of growth opportunity for businesses across the world. So what I'm excited about is just that underlying kind of sustainable structural growth dynamic that's pretty macro insensitive and actually will continue to deliver. And I think within our team, we're spending a lot of time kind of picking apart our underlying investment theses and trying to say, well, actually, that structural growth driver still exists. We can back this business for the next 1, 5, 10 years because we still believe that underlying demand driver will be in place. So that's where I think you can really have that conviction as a sustainable investor, where you are linking it into your investment thesis, where you are linking it to effectively where you are different to the market. And it's very important in our perspective to not focus on ESG ratings, to not focus almost too much on sustainability data. What we're looking for is differential perspectives relative to the market, areas where we have different views on growth, different views on competitive advantage, and pull those back to sustainability. So it's our sustainable insights that really drive our investment edge.
That's fascinating. And it's kind of touching on some of the points we were going to discuss around the sufficiency of data today. And it seems like that's only one thing you would look to, that there's a more holistic sustainability aspect that you would look to there instead of necessarily the data. Just if you were to kind of take the temperature or we give a comment on where we are with sustainability data and its comparability, what would you say is the case today?
Well, broadly, our view is not everything that matters can be resolved by data. So there are elements where it's really important to combine data with qualitative judgment. So data is very difficult for extrapolating, very difficult for putting directly into your forecast as such. It requires a lot of judgment, a lot of overlay, and a lot of understanding of the broader context. So our view is we encourage companies to disclose data where it's relevant, and then we will effectively take our own perspectives and layer them on top. So for us, sustainability investing is very much about combining the quantitative with the qualitative and then making our own judgments and taking our own views as to where we differ from the market.
And in terms of the clients' objectives, many clients today have net zero goals of their own. There's a little bit of, I suppose, debate about how they get there and what net zero really entails. Any thoughts from your side about how you would feed into something like that?
Well, we talk a lot to the companies we invest in and encourage them to disclose, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. We encourage them to disclose to the CDP. We encourage them to set science-based targets, and we will then engage with them on the progress towards those science-based targets. And then we'll even take a step forward and really talk to companies about, for example, carbon avoided disclosure and perhaps steps towards making estimations in those kind of end goals. So our view is this is still relatively early space, but we do think that there is a lot of potential for companies to improve their disclosure, and we need responsible investors to monitor and think about how the companies are delivering on the targets and on those promises they've set.
And just in terms of your engagement with companies, their engagement is certainly the preferred route by many institutional investors. And engagement itself has come a long way as it's become more mainstream, I suppose. Engagement reports will be many hundreds of pages long every quarter. Where would you say we are in terms of efficacy of engagement? And is that something that 91 engages in?
Yeah, so I think engagement's really developed, and there's a much more of a sense of what we're trying to achieve. And that's really kind of improved to our mind as the engagement has become interwoven with the investment process. So it's the investors at 91 who lead the engagement discussions, and it's really interwoven with what we're looking for companies to achieve in terms of delivering their growth and delivering their sustainability goals. So I think divorcing those two elements historically proved very difficult, but actually the progress that companies like 91 have made in bringing the engagement conversations into the investment teams has done a lot to really drive corporate conversations forwards and lead to better outcomes, I would say, for all considered.
One of the things I love about the 91 logo is the sustainability with substance. So it's really says it all, I think, in terms of it not being lip service. It's, meaningful. It's always been alpha driven. And I think that just sums it up. You host a video series called Sustainability with Substance. Can you tell us a little bit about what that covers and maybe insights that it's given you?
Sure. So this is a series of, as you say, of videos where we've really tried as a sustainable equity team to approach topics from different perspectives and really shine a light on where we think the market is misunderstanding or really where the market's ignoring important elements of sustainable value creation. And the focus has always been on that, to have a differential perception and to bring it into the investment realm to kind of highlight the investment implications of what we're talking about. And there's been areas within the video series where we haven't pursued initial ideas. For example, we looked at the blue economy, circular economy, etc., but we haven't been able to find significant investment implications. We haven't been able to find enough companies where that sustainable element is enough of a driver of the business. So we've focused on areas where we do have investment opportunities. So we've talked about decarbonisation, financial inclusion, healthcare impact, climate adaptation. And what we're trying to do is really weave our sustainability insights into where we disagree with the market and where we think we can effectively shine a light on things that's largely been ignored by the broader kind of economy. And I think it really has been able to showcase some of that multiple stakeholder thinking that really pulls our team together. And it's been great to have quite a lot of different guests come in, share their perspective, and then allow us to weave it into an investment thesis and how we can invest in it across different portfolios.
Fascinating, and certainly gets to the what are we overlooking or underestimating question there. Yeah. And the last question in the section just around the S part of ESG. And clearly, since you start and finish with corporate culture, inclusion, engagement, all of these things are key. But taking a step back at our industry, if you were to give it maybe a broad industry culture grading, in terms of our industry's inclusion, and in particular around, say, female and diverse portfolio managers. Any comment on where we are versus where we were maybe when you started 20 years ago?
Sure. So a difficult subject, and one where I think we've perhaps not made as much progress as we might initially have thought we have. The numbers of portfolio managers has probably edged up ever so slightly, but the assets being run by those portfolio managers hasn't moved very much at all. And I think if I look back on my career, when I started at Goldman Sachs, we were 4 women and 4 men. That's a very equal intake as graduates. But over the time, over the development of our careers, it's become much more focused on men. And I think it's that kind of mid-career element that can be quite challenging if we're thinking about different gender participation in the investment industry. So I think a piece of work and a topic that will increasingly need to be tackled by the financial industry is keeping women in careers, promoting them at the kind of mid-level and ensuring that they continue to have their voice in the room, ensuring they continue to have access to interesting portfolios, interesting client conversations. And that is difficult to achieve. And there's lots of initiatives underway. Girls Who Invest a US nonprofit that I'm involved with is really beginning to grapple with some of these issues. And it's something that our internal 91 Inspire network is also thinking about. And we need to make sure that women are kept in this industry, that they want to stay in this industry. And effectively, when they have interruptions in their career, which will happen, they have a job that's worth coming back to. So there's many kind of elements that really kind of differentiate the career trajectory of women, and we need to perhaps tackle them a bit more honestly and a bit more directly than we generally do across finance.
So interesting. And I agree with you. I think that there is a kind of each individual candidate's kind of blocking and tackling involved. It's not like one size fits all in terms of policy change or initiatives. It's really intentionality around sponsoring individual careers and making it work for them.
I mean, it's quite different being a portfolio manager to being, say, an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, because a lot of those professions you can pre-qualify before you have children, perhaps. So in your 20s, you can achieve a qualification that can allow you to step out of the industry and then step back in after having children. Whereas if you're going to be a portfolio manager, your track record is your qualification. And if there are interruptions in that track record, say you did have some time out to have a child, it can be quite difficult to piece that back together and really step back into an equivalent role as to before the interruption. And I don't know what the exact answer to that is, other than being very conscious that that is a challenge that a lot of women will face as they enter their 30s and really will struggle to navigate that on differing bases.
Really interesting. And I know some other firms are really focusing deliberately on this in terms of that track record portability. And maybe it's a kind of a fusion of teamwork, individual accountability that does it. But I think definitely something that deserves more attention. And just moving to some reflections now. So 20-year career so far, that's a very natural time to look back and look at who maybe shaped it the way it did. Any key people either pre or during your professional career that had a particular impression on you?
So I was really lucky with who I first ever interviewed with in finance. It was a gentleman called Danny Truell, who was at Goldman Sachs when I knew him, and then he went on to be CIO at the Wellcome Trust. He was the first person who ever said to me, actually, you're not quite set up for, I think I signed up for equity sales or something. And he said, actually, you had the right personality for asset management. So he was really supportive. He brought me into Goldman's and effectively teed me up for a job that I've been doing for 20 years ever since. Another lady called Nicolette MacDonald Brown, she was my first ever manager back in 2005. And she really showed me how to be a great equity analyst. She really showcased that diligence, that courage as well to have different ideas, but also to fit other things into your life. I remember she used to go running before work every morning, and I couldn't even fathom that at the time, but she really showed me that you can combine doing a job like this, doing a job in financial markets with having a life outside of work. And I really remember all of the kind of things that she taught me from that kind of balance, that juggle. And then I probably call out someone quite recently in my last role. I had a really fantastic co-PM who I really enjoyed working with and really showed me the value of 1+1 can equal 3. I think it's really lovely when you can find those opportunities in your career where working with another mind really opens you up to different ideas and different perspectives. So I think kind of those three people have really helped me grow and really helped me kind of keep in this industry and keep inspired and keep excited by the job that I do.
Oh, lovely call outs there, each one different in its own way. Last question is around any key words of advice or wisdom that you've heard throughout your career or that you've developed on your own. Anything you can share with us there?
Well, I was thinking about this the other day when my daughter had to make a family shield for an art project, which is quite a obscure request, but it was her homework. And we had to come up with a family motto. And I remember talking to my husband about this, and we really thought, you know what? Our family motto is to make the most of every opportunity. And I think that really rings true with the way we like to live, the way we like to lean into different ideas and, effectively go for it because you only have one life. So we really try to live that both out of work, but also in work. So I'm often one to put my hand up for new ideas. I like to be involved. I like to think of different ways of doing things. I like to be creative. And all of those things work very well at 91. 91 not only has kind of hashtag of sustainability with substance, but also it has this creed of freedom to create. is a business that's really grown organically back from its roots 30 years ago in South Africa. And it's done phenomenally well by having this culture, having this ethos of having freedom to do something different. And all of those kind of elements come together to a very distinctive culture within 91, where making the most of every opportunity really does fit. People are encouraged to go out on a limb, to be creative, to build something that's worthwhile. And I think that really shines through in the way 91 employees interact with each other, but also in how they do business with clients. And I hope it will continue to always be the way for 91.
I love that. As I was thinking of your daughter's assignment, I thought, well, A, what a good idea. But B, then with what you came up with, I said, I wonder what the Latin equivalent is. But probably there is. I mean, carpe diem is there. So maybe that's something, an evolved form of carpe diem. But I love how that has been the hallmark, not only of your personal and family life, but also your professional one. Thank you for coming here and for uniting the world of sustainability in a context of alpha and culture, the right kind of positive culture. Thank you for sharing all of your insights with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a real joy.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear from more inspiring investors and their personal stories, you can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organizations and affiliations of the host or any guest.